leave my camera off until I get back inside, so I don't look like a twat walking through my house.
Well, you do look like a twat, Gilbo, because we are now live on the Aggressive Pacifist, brought to you by Free Speech Media. You can find Free Speech Media Network at dlive.tv/free speech media. And at Free Speech Media, the super chats are always as free as speech should be. So get your questions in, ask your comments, and as always, make sure to give us your lemons. This is the Aggressive Pacifist Podcast. I am your co-host, Harrison, as always joined by the beautiful and mysterious Jared Gilbo Gaggins. How are you tonight, my friend?
I'm doing wonderful. I'll have my video up here in just a short minute, but I'm doing wonderful. It's been an exciting week so far. Even though it's Monday, we're bringing it to you 2 days early, technically a day and change early. But we have a good show for you tonight. I think that it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to give you some historical background, and we're going to talk a lot about history tonight in general.
Yeah, tonight we are going to be talking about Operation Anthropoid. We're going to be talking about the fall of the Iron Curtain and some of the history and some of the kind of conspiracy that goes along with that. Anytime there's an event that big, there's a lot of actors behind the scenes who are kind of each trying to get their way. So, you know, this was Jared's idea for a show. Jared comes from that region of the world. He is very in tune with that. He loves the history of that region. And I said, you know what, buddy? I agree. Let's do it. So we're doing it. Now, Operation Anthropoid was made into a wonderful movie in 2016. So some of you might have heard of this before now from that. And if you want to get kind of an idea of what we're talking about, go ahead, check that movie out after this. So, Gilbo, where do you want to start with all of this? Because there's a lot to go through.
Well, let's start with the progression and the economic standpoint of, we'll say, Eastern Europe, excuse me, leading up to the fall of the Iron Curtain. And if you want to spearhead that, I'd be happy to let you take the point on that one.
So, talk about leading up to the fall of the Iron Curtain, yeah. So,
right.
Everybody knows that the Iron Curtain separated East and West Germany, and it was basically what was happening is that there was one side of the wall who was literally being shot for trying to cross, and then on the other side you were having people who knew it was wrong who could do nothing to help. So there was a lot of tension. Finally, one day, a lot of folks, it was like in the hundreds of thousands of people, said, you know what? We're done. We're taking to the streets. They protested. They marched the gates. When they marched the gates, the people guarding the gates clearly realized they were outnumbered, so they just opened the gates and let them through. That is when all of the kind of imagery that we see of the walls being torn down, that's when that comes from. So there are still pieces of the wall that stands today, and they say it's as a memorial that no matter what happens, no matter how separate people try to make you, you can always find your way back together. So one of the big reasons, or one of the big things that had led up to this, was that they were losing control of the markets. They were losing control of their population base, because as the communist side of Germany started to grip down more and more, there was a large outflux of educated people, of hardworking people, like people who knew what was coming down the pike. They just started to flee. There was like 253,000 people who had fled in the couple of years leading up to the wall being put up, and then after that there was still about 5,000 people who got out between 61 and 89. But a lot of folks were shot. There was I think 130 or so people who ended up being shot as they were trying to cross through. So there was a lot of tension, and a lot of it came from economic pressure. The economy of the communist side there was just like every other communist country. It was horrific. They had not enough food to live on. The simple little consumer items like silly putty didn't exist. There was a lot of stuff that was leading up to the Berlin Wall being put up, but there was also a lot of stuff that led up to its demise. And one of the things that really kind of stuck out to me in looking at this, because I didn't know nearly as much about this as you do, is that the people who were on the communist side of the wall there, as they were stuck, they they were protesting every now and then, but they got so beat down very quickly that they just stopped for a while. There was like a large gap of not a whole lot of protest. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
So,
absolutely. And I mean, you had the side where, most of these countries in Eastern Europe that were occupied by the Nazis from 1939 until the latter parts of 1944. Well, they were under heavy, Nazi occupation, and then they went directly from a Nazi-controlled environment to a Soviet Union-controlled environment. So their livelihoods never really improved. Their sanitation, their economy, their lives as a whole never truly improved. And speaking to some of the people that lived through both sides of that, as old as they may be now, they still can go back and recollect that, life under the USSR and life under Nazi occupation was not a whole lot different. They suppressed free speech. They suppressed, local economy. They suppressed history quite a bit. The Slavic people could not teach their history. Anything on the contrary to Stalin or Gorbachev or so on and so forth was considered to be heresy. They couldn't teach their history. And for a lot of those people, their history was everything. You had people that would, inhabit a village for several hundred years at a time. And their stories and their history meant everything to them. And having their identity, if you will, stripped away from them, it bred a lot of discontent over time. And it got to the point where the people couldn't take it anymore. The people wanted their life, their country, their livelihood back, so that they actually finally went out and did something about it via protest, via sabotaging, whether it be Nazi stockpiles or Soviet stockpiles or so on and so forth. You could tell that there was a lot of discontent in Eastern Europe, and that folks were not happy the way that they were being governed.
now, you talk about them attacking Soviet stockpiles, attacking Nazi stockpiles. So they were not adverse to using violence to achieve their ends, which is, in this case, totally fine, according to any libertarian policy you could ever think of. No one would have an issue with it. That's not the point. My point is that they were not pushing over. They were not willing to say, "Oh, we're just going to let you move in and take over, even though we disagree with you." So let me ask you this: how many invasions, or rather, how many firefights, how many types of excursions, operations? What were some of the big ones that they launched in retaliation against the Nazis, against the Soviets, against all that?
I mean, going back to as early as Operation Anthropoid during World War II, that was the first big pushback, because the chief protector, as he was called, Reinhard Heydrich. He was the chief protector of Bohemia, Moravia, what is now the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, so on and so forth. And it was just a massive invasion. The Nazis took Prague without any resistance at all. Very minimalistic, if anything. And they had their country invaded. They had their traditions invaded. Their lives as a whole changed forever. And the people were not super content with that, especially because as soon as Heydrich came in and started implementing Nazi policy, Nazi law, like I said, they censored everyone's traditions, and they tried to make it a pinnacle or a mirror image of Berlin. Whereas, earlier on in the late 30s, during the Munich Pact, the rest of Europe had essentially screwed over Czechoslovakia by allowing the Nazis to take certain portions of their northern land. And in turn, they allowed the Nazis to then infiltrate the entire region, which in modern day would be the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, and some of the surrounding areas. Well, they did so in hoping to prevent further war, further, widespread Nazi occupation, in thinking that Hitler would be happy with the land that he had. Unfortunately, that was not the case. And in doing so, they screwed over millions of people. So after the Nazis took control of Prague, Reinhard Heydrich was a very ruthless man. He was the brains behind the final solution to the Jewish problem, also known as the Holocaust. He gave direct resources and direct order to create concentration camps, to create places where Jews would be exterminated. He crafted methods for extermination, and he ruled with an iron fist. Reinhard Heydrich was the face of Nazi Germany. Hitler didn't look the part. Heydrich looked the part. He was blonde-haired, blue-eyed, very strong features, very strong German features. And he was what Hitler wanted that race, your typical Aryan. That's what he wanted your typical Aryan to look like. He was the poster child for Nazism. And people absolutely loved him in Germany, and he became Satan, for lack of a better term, in Eastern Europe, because he would kill political dissidents. He would murder people in the streets. He would allow the Nazis to go through villages, to go through Prague and ravage bars, ravage small establishments, and do as they please. And anyone who opposed him was executed immediately. And he became the central head, the central figure, if you will, for what folks didn't want. So as the Nazi occupation progressed, the Czechoslovak government in exile, which was actually based out of Great Britain at the time, they, along with the Czech resistance and the Slovak resistance, which was very, very small, even leading up into the mid-40s, they devised a plan to execute Reinhard Heydrich, which they knew that this plan would have severe repercussions. They knew that even if they accomplished their goal, even if they were able to allow everything to come to fruition, that there would be heavy penalties, that there would be backlash. And they still thought it necessary to allow everything to go through. So they devised Operation Anthropoid, for which they had several highly trained soldiers who actually went and trained with British SAS and then were airdropped back into Prague to then fulfill the goal of going in, assassinating Reinhard Heydrich, and hopefully taking back the country. Well, not everything went exactly as planned. And we can hop back to this, or I can keep going. I feel like I'm going to go off on a tangent of history.
No, keep going, my friend. You're running it. I will ask you one thing, though. Can we go ahead and see your beautiful face? Because
we can do that.
According to Tyler Rowe, you look like you are streaming from bed right now. And everybody right now can understand what we're going through. And, bedtime is here. So, Gilbo, hopefully you can get out. And Ricky Savage says that he's digging the new look in the logo. Thank you, Ricky. It took some time to get it done. We appreciate your appreciation. So, Gilbo, you had said quite a bit of stuff in there of importance. Let's go back a little bit. So, you were talking about how Hitler was able to walk right into Prague, and there actually were reports that his soldiers came in the morning, and by evening, Hitler was able to drive right in a topless car, in a convertible. So there was no resistance at that point. Why was there no resistance at that point, but later down the road, we had so much?
Because as part of the Munich Pact, the leaders of Europe, and especially Eastern Europe at that time, they could see what Hitler's power was. They could see his popular support, his backing. They didn't want any further aggression being pursued by the Nazis in Europe. So they figured if they gave Hitler what he wanted, he would leave the rest of them alone. And at that price, he sold out a lot of Eastern Europe. You know, the leaders of Europe, of Eastern Europe, had sold out the Czechoslovak people, the Romanian, Polish, and so on and so forth, because it wasn't much at all for Hitler to move from the northern region, what is now the Czech Republic, up in Poland, and to then further progress down into Romania, down into Serbia, so forth. And what they thought they were doing was limiting Hitler by acceptance, by saying, okay, you know, we're going to go ahead and give you this land, and with a quote unquote, you know, peaceful transition of power. Well, the first thing that the Nazis did when they entered Prague was they seized the National Bank. They took control of all the money going in and out. They took control of all the capital. They took control of anything that was of value.
Well,
and they asserted their over the Eastern European region.
Well, and that makes sense. If you're going to try and take over a region, you want to take their resources, and why wouldn't you want to take their money? That's one of the biggest resources people have. So that makes sense. Let me ask, oh, you went ahead and put your camera on right as I was putting up a picture of Guile so that everybody could see you. Oh, look at that. Perfect timing. There we go. All right. So you were saying some pretty intelligent things there, and before I let you go back on your tangents, I do want to remind everyone to please go to dlive.tv/freespeechmedia, make your DLive account, follow us on DLive. It's the easiest way to follow the program, and we have tons of great shows for you. Starting next week, we have a few good shows coming up for you after hours. We will have the Johnny Lemuria Show and Liberty Dad directly after this. So make sure you go over there, follow us on dlive.tv/freespeechmedia, and you can find us on Facebook at The Aggressive Pacifist. So, Gilbo, we were talking about Heydrich and how Heydrich was the orchestrator of a lot of the extermination that was going on of the Jewish race in Germany, in Europe, throughout this whole region. So that's why it was so important for them to take him out, is because he was really the worst of the worst. You know, Hitler was a horrific guy, but they couldn't get access to him. So you take out number 3. I mean, it makes sense that they would have spent so much time, energy, and have been willing to take such a backlash to get someone like him, though. You know, if they could have got Hitler, they would have done the same, but They got someone high enough up on the totem pole, knowing that made it worth the risk they were going to face, because there was 5,000 Czechs who were murdered in response. Now, had they killed some random low-level nobody, it wouldn't have been worth the backlash they would have received. What do you think about all that?
Well, the whole point of going after Heydrich was that Heydrich came in and he basically crowned himself the king of Bohemia, Moravia, Slovakia, Romania, so on and so forth. He was a pompous, arrogant dictator. He went in and made Prague Castle his home. He crowned himself the Bohemian crown jewels. He put St. Wenceslaus's crown onto his head and proclaimed himself the king, if you will, which we're going to get into this later on in the conspiracy portion of this. However, he thought that he was all that in a bag of chips. He would ride around Prague in broad daylight in his open-top white Mercedes with a minimalistic guard, because he knew that he was the most feared man in that region of Eastern Europe. He knew that nobody dared to defy him, because if not, their family would be slaughtered up the street. Their business would be burned to the ground. He would take any small amount of their heritage that he saw to be threatening, and he would torch it. He was scary, well revered in Germany, that is, but he was a scary individual, and folks absolutely hated him, but they were scared to death of him. So they devised this plan, Operation Anthropoid, to essentially show the Nazis and to show the world that they are not of that the Czechoslovak people are not of weak descent. They are not going to let a tyrant come into their homeland and dictate to them how to live without consequence. And there was a lot of consequence, obviously. So as everything progressed, as far as Operation Anthropoid went, they had two of the biggest names in that operation were a Czech pilot and a Slovak pilot. And their names were Jan Kubas and Josef Gebček. And they gave everything that they had. They gave up their lives. They gave up their personal lives as far as, being able to get married and have children. They basically devoted their life to this cause. And what their initial plan was, they tracked Heydrich's movement all throughout the city. They knew at what point in time on Tuesday he was going to be on such and such a corner. And they had weapons freighted in from the UK, given the UK and the Czechoslovak government in exile was trying to orchestrate this with having minimum to no contact in country. So as things progressed, most Czech resistance was not about it. They weren't able to confirm dates and times. They weren't able to confirm the validity of messages being sent from the government in exile. And the Czech resistance was starting to get pretty scared because they had a lot of pressure on them. They felt like they were being watched a lot more. So a shipment of guns came in, which was specifically made for this particular hit. And they were waiting for Heydrich to pull up in his Mercedes. He had two armed guards with him. And the Czech resistance had a very basic, at the time, semi-automatic assault rifle, as folks would call it. A semi-automatic rifle. Well, they didn't really have the opportunity to go out and test all of these weapons after they assembled them, due to being right in town Prague, noise, and maintaining their low level of existence. Trying to slip between the cracks of the Nazis, holding meetings underground and trying to heavily vet anybody who would then come in and try to help them.
Yeah, you can't really do target practice when you're planning on killing someone in the middle of the city. It just,
exactly.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening was, after weeks and weeks and weeks and not receiving the blessing of the government in exile, they still proceeded with Operation Anthropoid. And they waited for Heydrich to pull up to a stop sign. And just prior to him taking off, they had 3 or 4 guys jump out right in front of him with these semi-automatic British weapons. Official to be assassinated during World War II. He was the only one. They couldn't touch Himmler. They couldn't touch Hitler. So in many ways, killing him brought satisfaction. It certainly did to the folks of the Czechoslovak region. And it was a shock to the world that, you know, these people can be touched. They can have a massive monkey wrench thrown in their operation, when prior to that, the Nazis were just steamrolling anyone and everything that got in their way. They had met very minimalistic resistance at that time.
Yeah, no one could stop the Nazis when they were going through. It didn't matter what resistance was put up. They just were overpowering. They had the best tech. They had really the hardest soldiers at the time, and a lot of that's because they were boosted up with amphetamines, or methamphetamines rather. Their chocolate was laced with it. I mean, they didn't feel pain. They didn't feel remorse. So one thing you were saying in there really kind of stuck out to me, which was that they knew their lives were going to be over if they did this, but yet they still did it. And there's still debate to this day as to whether the actions they took justified the ends, because really at the end of the day, you think about it, Reinhardt was somebody who is a manager. He's in a managerial position, but he's more than that. So did the ends justify the means? Did them killing him justify the 5,000 people that were killed afterwards?
As far as justification for the Czechoslovak people, the people who were directly affected by Reinhard Heydrich and his ramp up of all of the concentration camps, his push to exterminate the Jews, and telling Hitler in very explicit detail how to do so. If you're talking gas chambers or otherwise. Heydrich was an evil man, and everyone in that region saw it. Nobody wanted him around. And by killing him, it made the Nazis, seem vulnerable. Regardless of the end of that, they showed the world, they showed Eastern Europe, when Eastern Europe needed that confidence most, that they are not untouchable, and that they are still human, and that they bleed just like you and I. So even though at the end of the day, because unfortunately, this is just like most stories, between Kubis and Josef Jepchik, their resistance was not necessarily short-lived, but after Hitler sent out a lot of manpower to go and catch these folks, to catch the resistance, their group, as they were trying to flee to exile, to regroup, they were trying to adapt and overcome their odds, ended up getting held up into a bell tower in a church, completely surrounded by Nazis. And I think it was 8 of them total fought to the bitter death, and unfortunately succumbed to what was just the pure manpower of the Nazis at that time. Intel was leaked as to where they were staying. Intel was leaked as to who they were associated with. Anybody associated with the Czech resistance or presumed to be a part of the Czech resistance was executed on the spot. And unfortunately, to those 2 gentlemen, who I personally see as heroes, they went out in a blaze of glory. They killed as many Nazis as they could before their area of the bell tower was overtaken. And they didn't let fear dictate their lives. They didn't let an evil, atrocious dictator tell them what they were going to do with the rest of their lives. And I certainly commend them for their efforts.
Keep talking, Gilbo. I am dealing with something on this end here.
So pertaining to this particular story, it came with a lot of backlash. Just like Harrison had said earlier, there was 5,000+ Czechs and Slovaks that were killed in direct relation to a retaliation effort brought on by the Nazis. Hitler wanted people to pay for this. And I think it hit Hitler in his ego, because he then realized that they could be touched, that they were not invincible. And it sent shockwaves all throughout Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain for that matter. The Czech government in exile was so astonished that they were able to achieve such a feat that they began ramping up their production of, you would have more Czechoslovaks go to Great Britain, go to certain free areas of France and train so that they would be ready to then go back and retake their homeland. These were people who were being sick of, they were sick of the oppression. They were sick of the living conditions, the pure madness that was happening right in front of them, right in front of their children. And they wanted to then go ahead and do something about it. Which, moving on from Operation Anthropoid towards the end of the end of World War II, was that General Patton's army was within 50 miles of Prague, and they were given orders to stand down because Stalin's Red Army had then come down from the north, and they were going to take Prague as the victors. Well, by that time, the Nazis were well aware by the end of World War II that they had lost, that they were done. So not a whole lot of folks stuck around to see what the Red Army or the 53rd U.S. was going to do to them. So they made off like bandits. They ransacked the city. They took what they could. And then Stalin and the Red Army came into Prague like they were heroes, like they were liberators. They erected monuments. They doctored the history to make it seem like Stalin was in fact the victor and Stalin was the savior.
Well,
go ahead.
Oh, so yeah, they had done all that, and there's one thing that always kills me with these types of situations is how one horrible group is in charge and then another horrible group comes in and takes power and acts like they're somehow the good guys. So when we're talking about a situation like this where these gentlemen know what they're facing, what they're up against, and they also know that this is kind of a last-ditch effort in a sense. If they can pull this off, like you said, it reinvigorates the fight. It gives the people a reason to keep going. Now, you were on a crazy history lesson right there, and as Ricky Savage says, that it's the history lesson he didn't know he needed, and it's one that I didn't know I needed either, because I don't know a whole lot about this topic. So I'm going to ask you a question that I hope isn't a screwball, but why in the hell would this Reinhardt guy drive around in a convertible like this? I mean, really, like, that's common sense.
Because he was so pompous and he was so arrogant to the fact that he owned the city. He had everybody living in crippling fear of the image which was Reinhard Heydrich. He personified himself as a god. He crowned himself with Czech crown jewels. Like I said, as part of the conspiracy, came back to bite him in the ass. Everyone was so afraid of him, and he was so confident and so pompous in himself that he would ride around in his open-top Mercedes, and people would cringe and hide as he drove by. So he thought that he was above any of that. And what the Czech resistance wanted to show was, in spite of him being as pompous and as arrogant as he was, they used that, they used all of that to their advantage. They go, well, we're going to show the world that, one head of the Hydra can bleed, that we can, in fact, cut it off, and that we can make waves for the better.
So now to kind of bring it over and bridge the gap into our conspiracy of the night, talking about Saint Wenceslaus's crown. That's the jewels that you keep referring to. And so yes. Why don't you can go ahead, tell people what that is, of that.
So during that point in time, when Reinhard Heydrich had ransacked St. Victus Cathedral, which is one of the oldest, still functional to this day, churches in the world, located inside Prague Castle. When he overtook Prague Castle and made that his personal stomping ground, if you will, one of the first things that he did is when he went through and Heydrich and the Nazis went through and they were ferrying off treasure, he picked up the crown of St. Wenceslaus and he basically proclaimed himself king of Bohemia, Moravia, and Slovakia. And he did it almost as a joke and almost as a smear, and it pissed off a lot of the people. It pissed off everyone. And then he took that into his personal possession. And naturally, the entire country cursed him for it. Because for the previous 1,000 years, that was a very respected, revered, it was a very holistic possession. And it was kept under lock and key. So for Heydrich to do this, he spit all over tradition, and he basically said to the curse, he goes, "I'm above the curse." Well, I'm glad, in my personal opinion, that my people were able to get back at him and say, okay, no one is above the curse. You want to come in here and ransack our city, kill our people.
Yeah, I mean, if no one's above the Madden curse, I don't think anyone can be above the curse of Wenceslaus.
No. So I think that's a very small, I'm going to say it's a very small, very trivial, a couple comments in this entire discussion. But it's interesting to see that he swore up, down, and sideways that it was just, old wives' tales and that a curse didn't scare the great Reinhard Heydrich. And sure enough, he showed that he was not in fact bulletproof, that he was not in fact a god. I'm sure that he had that thought in the back of his mind as he was sitting in a hospital bed in Prague, bleeding out, dying of sepsis.
Well, he may have been bulletproof, but he damn sure wasn't grenade proof.
Damn sure wasn't shrapnel proof. So that's something that's held in heavy lore in Bohemian folklore and in tradition as well. The folks over there are very, very traditional. They're very respectful of tradition, and they don't take well to folks pissing all over their traditions. So when I was actually over in Prague about a year ago, I was able to see the replica, which they keep inside Prague Castle. The actual crown of St. Wenceslaus is now held in the basement, or I'm trying to think what they call it, the catacombs of St. Victus Cathedral, under 7 locks with 7 keys, all dispersed throughout the local government. Leaders of parliament, the Czech president, the mayor of Prague, their cardinal, so on and so forth. It's a very well protected artifact, and it's because it's survived for 1,000 years.
Yeah, it's survived. So yeah, it's been around for about 1,000 years, and it was actually used. It was started in 1347, and this thing lasted. It was in service for about 500 years. I think it was like the 1820s they stopped using it. So like 490 years for one crown. That's a wicked long time. So it makes sense that there's some folklore around this. Now, you had told me earlier that there was a kind of a list of people who have been victim to this crown. Aside from Heydrich, who else was there? Do you have any other names?
So looking back at larger prolific names, at folks who had essentially defiled the crown. And looking back to Wenceslaus I, he was a very young king. He was a very young Bohemian king whom was killed by his brother at a young age. He was not king of Bohemia for a very long time. And being known as the patron saint of Prague, he was known to be very pure of heart, very big and good to the people. And I'm actually looking to see how many other folks have been victim to the curse of Saint Gonzalez.
Yeah, I'm sure it's been quite a few, although I'm not sure how many people have laid the illegal claim to the throne. That seems like something that is a rare occurrence in that part of the world. And yes, Ricky, Jared does have a twin. It's Guile from Street Fighter. They look exactly alike. I'm pretty sure that Jared just ripped off that whole creature when developing who he was going to be. So, where are we in this story right now, Gilbo, as far as year-wise? Like, chronologically, what year are we in right now?
So we are in the very end of, well, if we're getting at the point where Stalin has then invaded, liberated, whatever you want to call it. So with Stalin liberating Prague, that was done in May of 1945.
So May of 1945, and then when did our fucking guy here, Reinhard Heydrich, when did he die?
So the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. So essentially, and the big thing that everybody wants to believe was that Heydrich died at the site. However, Heydrich did die later on, several days after the fact. So Operation Anthropoid was carried out May 27th of 1942, which was also at a point in time in the war when everything was going the Nazis' way. Their industry was huge. Everything was just kicking off and showing in their favor. Well, after Heydrich died, and after they were able to first pierce the serpent, if you will, it showed their vulnerability.
Yeah, and once they were shown to be vulnerable and it was proven that they could be hurt, why not continue that? Why not continue the fight against them? And especially when it's someone who you have a moral right to hate and a moral right to defend yourself against. So, we're coming into the final few minutes of this here, and I just want to remind everyone to go over to dlive.tv/freespeechmedia. If you're already there, make sure you ask your questions in the comments. Make sure you start typing in there, because we are about 5 minutes away from releasing the chest for the night, and that is how you make your crypto. And then make sure, if you think this show is worth some lemons, you give us the lemons. We need the lemons. Now, if you're on, go for it, Gilbo.
Oh, no, I was just saying, give us the lemons.
Yeah, give us the lemons. And if you are on DLive right now watching this, make sure you follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/theaggressivepacifist, or just search at The Aggressive Pacifist, and you'll find us there too. So now, Gilbo Gaggins, we have had quite a lot to talk about tonight. All historical, all stuff that people can go and Google. You can go on YouTube. You can find these videos. There's nothing crazy about what we've said. But I would like to get into something here that's not really Googleable, because you have had a trip over to this region of the world, and I would like for you to give some first-hand experience of this and what it looks like, and kind of like, from my understanding, you can still see the bullet holes from where the gentlemen, the 6 guys, ended up taking their lives in the bottom of the church. So if you could just go ahead and talk about that for a few minutes, because that's pretty cool to have that kind of first-hand experience with it.
So going into the church where essentially what most folks would then call, you know, the death of the Czech resistance, which after the boys had been slain up in the top of the bell tower, they went into the basement of the church, and they were running low on ammunition. They were running low on supplies. The Nazis were actually pumping water into the basement of the church. And just prior to, you know, them meeting their demise, they were up to their necks in water, and they had SS troops coming down the only way in or out. So after expelling all of their ammunition, they saved a bullet for themselves, every one of them, because they knew that what the Nazis would do to them as a result, and putting them on display for the murder of Reinhard Heydrich, was going to be way worse than whatever they could imagine. So going down into the bottom of that church and seeing the bullet holes, the frag grenade indentations, just, you know, all of the ballistics are still intact today. Holes, the frag they've preserved it all. And it's crazy to go be in that area where everything happened. I was actually able to walk down the street in Prague. They've near what is now a train station, and see where everything transpired, to see where they actually drew the guns jammed, they threw the guns, and then pulled the grenade. It was crazy to stand in the square where there was actually a famous picture of Hitler in his motorcade driving down Main Street in Prague, in Prague 1, Prague's first district, right next to the National Bank, and it being heavily Nazi occupied. I stood in that square and looked down the same street, and it was surreal. And I actually had the pleasure of doing a tour, which was all about World War II and further on, World War II events that transpired in Prague. And it was actually done by a Czechoslovak historian who for many years actually had to then go study. She studied in the US, she studied in Poland, and she studied in several other areas as well. Because under heavy Soviet censorship, they were not able to profess their history. They were not able to profess the events that transpired prior to Stalin coming over and saving the city. So until the fall of the Iron Curtain, a lot of the Czechoslovak people, a lot of the people in that region did not have the free will to speak their history, to document their history, to tell the stories of what actually occurred. It was only what was suitable in Stalin's eyes was the only thing that was meant to be published. And it was cool to go over and hear the history and to hear the, you know, all of the crazy stories, and to hear about the censorship from, you know, the mid 70s all the way up through the fall of the Iron Curtain. And then you had so many history books that were written in secret, so many diaries, so many journals of folks who had witnessed things firsthand. Secret meetings underground for the Czech resistance. You know, letters to the U.S. informing the U.S. of some of the crazy things that the Soviets were doing. Whether or not they actually made it there or not, I couldn't tell you. But to see all of these artifacts and like this secret world taking place was very, very cool.
That is pretty cool. That's
pretty real.
Yeah. So, now we're. Do you have any last words on this? Because I think I am pretty much out of things to say. Like I said, this is a topic where I was just excited to learn from you, because we have talked about this before, and you can just go for hours on this thing. So, do you want to keep going? Do you feel like I'm cutting you off right now?
Well, no. I was going to say, you know, the biggest thing with that leading up into the fall of the Iron Curtain and what then became the Velvet Revolution, which leading up to the fall of the Iron Curtain, there was a lot of disdain for the Soviet Union in a lot of Eastern Europe, as Harrison said. You know, economically, people were pissed off that they had family members that were stuck in different countries that they, that they couldn't access, that they couldn't go visit them. They had family members who were able to get through the Berlin Wall and then get to the other side, and then you had family members who died trying. So there was a lot of disdain, especially in the Far East regions of Eastern Europe. And after the Iron Curtain fell, the Velvet Revolution was essentially the peaceful transfer of power from what was once Czechoslovakia, which was created after the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So after World War I, they lumped all the Czechs, the Slovaks, some of the Serbs, some of the Romanians, and they threw them into this country that they had created. Well, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, the Czechs, the Slovaks, and some of the other outlying some of the other outlying tribes, if you will, said, well, hey, this is what we are going to go do. We're going to maintain our traditions. We're going to maintain our history. And the Slovaks in the southern region peacefully separated from the Bohemian and the Moravian regions, and then created what is modern day the Czech Republic, maintaining Prague as their capital, and the Republic of Slovakia with Bratislava as their capital. And it was, in my opinion, they basically said, you guys want to go do what you want to do up here and maintain your culture and maintain your set of rules and laws, and we want to go do the exact same thing a little bit further south. And they still maintain very peaceful relations. They still maintain commerce. It was the most peaceful transfer of power and the most peaceful separation that I can recollect in the last 50 years.
Wonderful. Yeah, it that should be the way that political separation occurs too. I mean, everybody has the right to secede. If you don't like the government you live under, you should have the ability to go live under a different government or live under no government. So let me ask you, Jared, we have a really big event coming up in less than a week. It's possibly, depending on who you ask, the biggest event of the year. I'm talking about the Super Bowl. Now, Tom Brady, the GOAT himself, is on his way to going for number 7. He's going to have bling on both hands. So what do you think we're looking at here? Because personally, I think that we're looking at a 31-28 victory for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Why? I don't really know. That's just what sticks out to me. What do you think?
Well, considering that you wrote that in a very cryptic code-esque manner and put it on the back of a voter registration card and put it on a magnet on my fridge, I would have to say that you're pretty adamant about it. I would say it's not far off. I think that it's definitely going to be a good game. The NFL will have immaculate ratings because Tom Brady, the old GOAT, if you will, and Pat Mahomes, the up-and-coming, young, successful quarterback, are playing each other in the Super Bowl for all the marbles. So I think that the ratings will be immaculate. I think it's going to be a close game. I'm going to say 28-24 in favor of the Buccaneers. As painful as that will be for me to watch Tom Brady win another Super Bowl, not with the Patriots. So essentially, I'd love to see him get number 7. I'm still going to be a little sore way deep down because I've watched the guy for 20 fucking years, and he goes in his first year with the new team, and he goes to the Super Bowl. That's got to be sore for more than just me, right?
Yeah, and he's got Gronk that came back out of retirement. Why did he come out of retirement? Oh, just because him and Tom Brady are such good friends? I'm not buying that. There's something behind the scenes,
Well, dude, and then again, too, if you look at the team, so the Buccaneers were nasty before Tom Brady and before Rob Gronkowski. Then they go out and they get Antonio Brown, who will be playing in the Super Bowl, folks. He has been cleared and activated to play in the Super Bowl. So it's going to be a hell of a show. I'm thinking it's going to be a very entertaining game, at least. It's definitely not going to be a boring one.
Yeah, and it's one of those games like we got Pat Mahomes, who's a pretty good running quarterback. He's got a pretty good arm, and I think that the only really weak spot there on that Chiefs team is not even the defense isn't even weak. It's just you're going up against Tom Brady, so I think that they could easily have this game blown out from under them because if let's say the Bucks get ahead 14-0 in the first quarter, right? That's still an overcomer. You can still overcome that deficit if you play right. But if the Chiefs get floundered and they start friggin' trying to only throw the ball and put too much on Pat Mahomes, they're going to lose. If they remember who they are and the fact they won last year and that they're still, as of right now, the best team in the NFL, presumably, I think they should be fine. But I do think that the wisdom of Tom Brady is going to come through. I mean, the guy has more rings than anybody else, so.
And considerably speaking, the biggest thing to keep in mind for this game, Pat Mahomes is fresh off a concussion. You know, the Buccaneers are fresh off of an awesome defensive game where they snubbed Aaron Rodgers and were able to take the NFC crown with their, in their first year with a brand new quarterback, with a brand new 43-year-old quarterback. Like throwing all of these unknown variables into their offense, and luckily for them, allowing everything to transpire the way that it has.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be a hell of a game. I think that the biggest thing that they can't do, which other teams have done in the past and gotten burned, do not give Tom Brady the ball back down by 3.
With like a minute and a quarter to go, yeah.
Right. Don't give Tom Brady the ball back with any amount of time. And even if he's got no timeouts, if you give Tom Brady a minute and 15 seconds left with no timeouts, he's down by 3 and he needs to go score a touchdown to win the game. Dude, I will never in my wildest dreams bet against Tom Brady. I literally sat there on the couch with my old man and watched him come back from a 28-3 deficit and win the Super Bowl.
Well,
and the old man,
especially with the team he's got,
said, he goes, don't even worry about it. He goes, never bet against Tom Brady. And that motherfucker came back and won the game. I will never bet against Tom Brady.
Yeah, especially with the team he's got around him. It would be very inconceivable for him to not be able to pull that out at the last minute like that. So we are going to go ahead and tie this up. We got 2.5 minutes till it's over for the night. So make sure if you're on DLive, you get in the chats there because we're about to release the chest. And the more active you are in the chest, the more of the chest you get. So hit your comment section fast and hard. And if you're on Facebook, make sure that you go to dlive.tv/freespeechmedia. We are the home of free speech. And if you're on dlive.tv right now, make sure you go to facebook.com/theaggressivepacifist. So I think we already gave our final predictions for that. We've already said who's going to win the game, the big game, the biggest of all. Now, since we always talk about something for real and then something conspiratorial, Gilbo, you understand that, the Super Bowl is usually used as a way for some of these secret societies to send some messages. And
well, very much so with the halftime show is the whole thing.
Yes.
Because you get the biggest stage in the world. You get the most amount of viewers across the world. And you have from, between 5 and 15 minutes to capitalize on that. And you see a lot of weird Masonic, a lot of weird Illuminati symbols. You see a lot of weird dress, a lot of weird hand signals go up right in the middle of a song or right towards the end of it. You have some very funkadelic shit happen.
Yeah, so for our next show, we will actually be talking about the some of those symbols and what some of those symbols are, what they mean, and how you can look out for them so that, these lizard people don't have to ruin your halftime show. So make sure you catch us here, The Aggressive Pacifist, every single Monday from 7 to 8 here on the home of free speech on dlive.tv/freespeechmedia, and find us on Facebook at The Aggressive Pacifist. Gilbo, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you, and then we'll call it a night.
So they can find me on Facebook with the Libertarian Party of Maine, the Libertarian Party of Maine Mises Caucus, and any personal questions or requests, especially if you're looking for requests for this particular podcast pertaining to history. I'd love to go in and delve into a history lesson and then give you my 2 cents worth on it. You can either hit us up on the show link, or you can email me directly at jgilbert@lpme.org. I would love to take those requests. I would love to learn some new history. Give me a broad topic. Give me something that's not, a popular opinion, and I would love to research it, dive into it, and then give you my 2 cents worth, and hopefully you're paying attention in the comments.
Yeah, and actually, I can do you one better than having to use that email. Send it to theaggressivepacifistpod@gmail.com, and we will go through all of your emails. We will see which topics you want us to cover, and we're happy to do so. That way, you don't have to be using that email, Gilbo. Keep it a little.
Which makes perfect.
Yeah, we've got one for the show, so we'll use that. So now it is the dun 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 time to release the chest. The awards have been distributed. They are distributing in 25 seconds. So we're going to go ahead and thank you all for joining us tonight. We will see you next week, and until next time, just stay beautiful.